welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is a show that profiles authors, editors, publishers in the West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky area. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and it's great to have you with us again today. Today, our guest is Jack Dickinson, and he is the author of Henry Ward, Reluctant Detective, among other things. We'll tell you that in just a minute. Jack grew up in Mingo County and is a 1966 graduate of Marshall University and a retired IBM systems engineer, which doesn't sound like somebody who would be writing fiction, does it? When he retired from IBM after 27 years, he established his own computer software consulting business here in Huntington. And following that, he worked at Marshall University as the bibliographer historian of the Rosanna Blake Civil War collection for 18 years. He retired from there earlier this year. He's the author of 25 books, most of which are on the Civil War in this local area. And he and his wife, Kay, have also written and self-published a series of books on the railroad history of southern West Virginia. Their most recent work is River of Sandbars, an encyclopedic history of steamboats on the Big Sandy River. His first novel was The Major's Final Mission, which was published 2 years ago in 2018, followed by the recent sequel, Henry Ward, Reluctant Detective, which is mostly what we'll talk about today. Jack is the recipient of several awards for his historical writing, including the National History Award from the Daughters of the American Revolution and the History Award from the West Virginia State Archives. Jack, thanks so much for being with us. It's good to have you.
Well, thanks, Carter, for having me on your show.
We met when I was working on Ken Heckler's biography up in the Marshall Special Collections Library.
Right.
But I had no idea at that time of your background or your writing life. You were very circumspect about all of that. So what prompted you to get out of the computer business and become a historian?
Well, it didn't happen one stopped and the other started. Back in the 70s and 80s, my wife and I started working on our genealogies, and that got us interested in some of the history, and that's what kind of got me started writing the Civil War books, because I found out both of us had ancestors that fought in the Civil War. So I kind of that was my hobby, even in the 80s and the 90s, of doing those kind of books. And so I more or less continuously, anyway, let's put it that way. But we'd always been interested in history and interested in our genealogies. That's what got us going on the history. And then about 2004, my wife grew up at Dunlow in Wayne County. And as some of your listeners will know, that Dunlow still has the old railroad station that was built in 1892. It's still there. And my wife grew up 1 mile from there and wanted to write a magazine article about when the railroad came through the old line, which is Dunlow, Wayne, down through Dingus, out through Naugatuck and like that. Mm-hmm. And when we started that, we found a lot more material than we thought we would. And she wanted to write about the Primitive Baptist Church, which her father was a minister. She was raised in the Primitive Baptist Church. So that kind of turned into that first book of the railroad histories of southern West Virginia. So
I see. Wow. So then that led you, after you got out of the computer business, to go to work at the Rosanna Blake collection, because obviously that had to do with the Civil War.
Well, I had been one of the major users of that collection. And Barbara Winters, who was then Dean of Libraries, you may remember Barbara, she asked for me to come to a reception they had of the libraries, and she mentioned to me that Dr. Slack, who had been the historical bibliographer of the Rosanna Blake collection, retired, and it had been closed for a year. And I said, we need to talk, because I was ready to get out of the computer software business, and so it was perfect timing.
Yeah. So what were your duties there? What did you do?
Well, my main mission and what I was hired for was to take care of the Rosanna Blake Civil War collection. And but what I ended up spreading out into was working with other areas of special collections. We put in a piece of software that to do inventory for special collections and to put our collections into. And I was instrumental in getting that in there and then supporting it. And then I ended up before I left Marshall, I had put in about 10,000 records of their materials, primarily photos, tintypes, ambrotypes, daguerreotypes that we have in, I still say we, even though I'm not connected to Marshall anymore. You got to slap me, Carter, when I do that. But so a lot of time, I divided my time between taking care of the Civil War collection and working in the other areas of special collections to get materials digitized and put online.
Mm-hmm. Mercy. Is that a widely used collection?
Yes, we have several parts. Well, you're a perfect example.
Right.
You've been a
I was
large
talking
user.
mostly about the Rosanna Blake collection.
Well, the Rosanna Blake collection, there's three sets of patrons that come to that collection. The first, of course, are history majors. Marshall teaches a class on the Civil War and Reconstruction. When Rosanna Blake left that collection to Marshall, she left enough of an endowment to fund 2 graduate level scholarships. And those people, one through the history department, one through the English department, and those people are required to write a paper using the Blake collection. So you've got captive audience of underclass and graduate students that use the collection. The second group are the local historian groups, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, the reenactors groups, all of which have an urge to find more out about, of course, the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters have to prove their genealogy back to a Confederate soldier or member of the government, and I help them with those sources and things like that. So that's group 2. Group 3 are the professional authors who are writing serious books who come in. We've had one professor from Atlanta, one from VPI, and like that are writing Civil War books to be published big time, Harper and Row and those kind of publishers. So, and a lot of what I do is answer genealogy questions and things, or Civil War questions that come into Marshall, and I did a lot of that. So that kept me busy. Yeah,
I'm sure it did. So you've used that information and gone on now to write, well, obviously you wrote a lot of those 25 books in the years that you were there, but now you've branched into fiction. What caused you to decide to try your hand at fiction?
Well, probably, I don't have a definite date, but probably 10 years ago, I started making notes in a little notebook about just kind of daydreaming, like, you know, when I really truly retire for the 3rd time, I may want to write some of this. And the first set of notes and everything I made, I ended up discarding and shredding and dropping that topic. I didn't want to do true Civil War anymore. But I started on another one, and I thought of this character who was a Civil War soldier, but that was kind of the background. And I kind of was comfortable with being able to write it as a historical novel, which, as you know, that means it's during actual historical events that really happened, and you're transposing a figure that you've basically invented into that. And so you try to get all the historical facts and everything as accurate as you can. So I like that part of it. And the other thing was, I was just wondering if I could write something like this that you invent totally out of your head and that it would make sense to anybody. I see you may have been in the same boat. You've done fiction and nonfiction both. And you know, you wonder how this is going to turn out and everything. But it was exciting because, for instance, when I started this story, it was this one man and a group of 4 others right at the end of the Civil War. They are, in essence, a covert operation group. And so they don't wear uniforms and all of this kind of thing. But I had no intent of even mentioning a woman's name in the book, let alone the main character falling in love with one. It just kind of happened. And that's a real strange experience.
Yeah, it's funny when the book takes over and it sort of writes itself.
Right, as somebody said, the character grabs you by the neck and becomes real.
That's right, exactly. So that was the first novel?
Yes.
What's the title of it?
The Major's Final Mission.
Okay, all right. So that's the same major that's now in this book?
Correct, yes. I'm going to do, well, I'm going to have a small series. I've done 2, and I'm already working on the plot for number 3, and he's the central figure.
So tell us a little synopsis of Henry Ward, Reluctant Detective.
Sure. Well, it takes place in 1873, so it's been 8 years after the end of the Civil War. He married this wonderful woman right at the end of the war. In the first novel, they were married. They've had a little boy, and he's 7 years old. And she was a war widow in that her husband was killed during the war, and she didn't want it, but she inherited the little town newspaper called the Falls Bluff Weekly. Her husband had run it, and now she's stuck with it. And but they encounter each other, and she's able to save him and his group from a problem. That's in the first one, and that's how they get to know each other and fall in love. So 1873, little Eli is 7 years old, and they're happy running the newspaper. And he gets a letter. He's had a letter maybe 3 times since the war from his old colonel, but everybody just calls him McFarland. And McFarland sent him a newspaper clipping and said, hey, you and your wife might be interested in this. There's an industrial exposition coming up in Cincinnati in September. And this is all true and well documented, the Cincinnati Exposition of 1873. And so Ward and his wife decided that would be a good trip. She said, we haven't been anywhere since our honeymoon, and if we can go on the train or a boat, let's do it. So they go, and McFarland and his wife are there. Well, McFarland's wife is kidnapped, and she is kidnapped by a group of Chinese thugs who are basically out to collect concubines for one Chinese man located in San Francisco. So a large part of the book is the chase using the Transcontinental Railroad, which was completed in 1869. That part took the historical research. Naive me, and like probably millions of others, thought the Transcontinental Railroad was one big long railroad. It was great. You got on it in the east and you went clear to the west. That ain't how it worked. It was a set of about 8 or 10 different railroads that were very loosely linked together.
Wow.
And as I said in the book, the passenger schedules changed on a daily basis of when you're trying to hook up with this one in Denver or Kansas City.
Yeah,
So,
I noticed that you had to move from one railroad to another.
right, and so so that's basically the synopsis of it. Is the chase to rescue McFarland's wife,
Now,
and come to find out that there's another woman kidnapped right at the same time, and so they go after both of them if they can rescue them.
right, now, is that Chinese character based on anything factual, or is that purely fictional?
How about, I'll give you I'm not sure, but let me tell you, did you ever watch the series Hell on Wheels?
Oh, yes.
Okay, you remember there was a Chinese character in there who stole from the Chinese. He was very well dressed, but he was basically a thug and a crook. So that gave me the idea for the person in this. He's different, as your readers will find out, but he's based on that character from Hell on Wheels.
Yeah, I remember that was a fascinating series, and I
It
remember.
was.
Yeah, I remember that character. And I remember in the book you even mentioned something about Hell on Wheels, and then I know
Well,
that they called those
they passed through, the train passed through a lot of the cities that had been towns similar to Hell on Wheels. They just stuck because so many of them, as I think somebody said that I used in the book, was what was left behind was garbage and graves for a lot of them, and that was all there was to city. Promontory Point's a good example of that, because everybody thinks Promontory Point is where the railroads met, which they did, and that a big town grew up. It didn't. It died. Everybody packed up and left, and it was a ghost town basically by 1873.
Wow. Now, I noticed that there was a lot of historical information, of course, in your book, and having to do with the towns that they passed through. Was that stuff that you already knew from your other non-fiction books, or is that stuff you had to research?
Stuff I had to research all of it. The main thing, you'll notice, and your readers will notice, is when they get stuck overnight in a town,
Mm-hmm.
they have to get a hotel room. I searched city directories and other sources to find out what hotels were in Denver or Kansas City or St. Louis in 1873, which isn't easy to find out sometimes. So wherever possible, which was in most of the cases, I would use a real hotel that was there or a real restaurant that they ate at and things like that. So yeah, that was all historical research strictly just for that book.
Mercy. That research is something that you can get kind of caught up in and spend a lot of time doing.
Well, my wife and I figured we've spent just about half a century doing that, and we both love it. The research we did, not for this novel, but the research we did when we wrote the volumes on the railroad history of southern West Virginia, which is really the N&W from Canova down through to Bluefield is what it is. We interviewed a lot of people that were just wonderful. They wanted to tell their stories about their father or their grandpappy that had worked for the railroad. I remember when he worked for the railroad, he told me a story about this. And that was the great part. My wife's father was in the CCC camp in Mingo County that built Cowboy Lingo Park. And she wrote a lot about him, and we interviewed people that could still remember that, and that their father had been in the CCC camps. And all that was what we really enjoyed, was the people you meet and talk to and want to tell their stories and that kind of thing.
Now, before she started doing the genealogy, was she also interested in history?
I'd say no.
No. So that kind of sucked her in, and now she's hooked, huh?
Right, both of us. But I think we're done doing historical nonfiction. There's just nothing else that we have on our plate that we're interested in doing. So I think in the near future, I think we're going to stick with fiction, at least for now.
And did she do a lot of your research for you?
Some, yeah. She's tied up in a bunch of other things, mainly flower gardens and that kind of thing. But yes, she definitely helps with it and still keeps her hand in it.
That's good. That's good. So you said you had a sequel coming up, another series, another in the series.
Right. It'll be another Henry Ward.
Yeah. Oh, Henry Ward, not McFarlane.
Well, McFarlane is in the third one, yes.
Okay.
The reason is that I haven't told you a whole lot about McFarlane now, after the war, has his own detective agency called McFarlane's Detectives. And that's how he gave Henry Ward a badge and everything in this book, and said if you could be a part-time detective, just, not all the time, and so that's the way the third one's going to be. McFarlane has another job for him, if you want to think of it that way.
I see. Okay, so he's kind of get assignments here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. All right, let me ask you another question about your nonfiction. You wrote a book about Albert Gallatin Jenkins.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Let me tell you the funny part about it. Since there's been two movements to rename Jenkins Hall at Marshall University, which I'm sure you're referring to. Well, the one that happened 2 years ago didn't make it.
Right.
And, but this one did.
Yes.
And the funny part was within a week or two after that, I got a handful of orders for the Jenkins book, which kind of surprised me in a way. Yeah. But it says, hey, I never heard of this guy. Who is this? Oh, somebody's written the book.
Well, how do you feel about the change? Did you find the things?
Oh, I think it was bound to happen sooner or later. So based on the last few years of what's happened, it was bound to happen.
Right. So you knew the concerns that people had about him from writing your book.
Absolutely. Well, no, that book was written long before that started.
No, but I mean, you knew that he was a slave owner and that he...
Oh, yeah. The part I didn't know that has not been proven to me is that he supposedly captured slaves to send them back south. I never found any good documentation that proved that, but people are finding new documentation in historical research every day.
Right, right. Do you have a specific writing routine? Well,
the fiction, that's what's so different about the fiction and the nonfiction. The nonfiction, what you're writing is you're taking from some other sources, whatever those sources are. They may be, so many more books are now published on the internet that you can download that are PDFs, which is wonderful.
Right.
You can do research that way. My wife and I did the bulk of our research, of course, before that got so big, and we went to the Library of Congress Manuscript Division. We did research. We did research in the National Archives multiple times. We've done 5 or 6 state archives: West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia primarily. But even though you're still doing historical research, you didn't have to be inspired, I didn't think, to do the historical stuff. You found 2 or 3 sources, you write a few paragraphs like that. The fiction is really different. I can't force that out. You have to be in the right frame of mind, and you have to envision what this is, or I do. So that's the big change between nonfiction and fiction, is kind of how you do it and how you can approach it. You make yourself do the historical. You got 3 books here, and I need 2 pages out of these, and I go to mark 2 footnotes, and you do it. The fiction is you're sitting back going like this, and it isn't happening. So,
Yeah,
have you been there?
I understand. Yes. Right. Right. Do you try and write every day?
Oh, no, not with everything since the virus and all of that. Plus, I mentioned in my bio that I'm volunteering now at the Huntington Museum of Art, and my mission there is to write a descriptive book, including a catalog of the Hermandine Firearm collection.
Right.
And a lot of the people in this area are familiar with. That's one of the top collections outside the Smithsonian in the United States, and it has weapons going back to the 12 and 1300s.
Right.
And so I'm spending time at home researching that. I only go a day a week to the museum, but they have a library there. And in that library, they not only have Hermandine's papers, they have his library of books. And so I take 3 or 4 books, bring them home, and work on that part. So I've got that one in work in process on that one too.
Yeah, you probably spend more time doing that than you did before on the.
Guilty.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. You're right.
Well, that obviously that historical part is the thing that captures your attention the most.
Afraid it does. You're right.
So when you and your wife write together, how do you do that? When you wrote those books together, did you write a part of the book and then she did research, or did she do a part of the book and you did?
She did a part of each one of the books. The question was how much. The Last Train to Dunlow, which was the first one we did, that, like I said, we thought that was going to be a magazine article about the Dunlow train station. She wrote more than half of that. If you want to say designed it, she designed it, what was going to be in that book, and she wrote major parts of it. Some of the others, I wrote the major parts. The book on train wrecks, which was Wheels of Flame, Whistle Wide Open, the train wrecks of the N&W Railroad, I wrote most of that. I was more interested in the train wrecks, but she did a lot of the research. The River of Sandbars, once again, I like the researching the steamboats and exploring those. She did a complete, almost half the book on the captains and the pilots. So she researched them through Ancestry and other sources. The murder book, which is Murder Along the Tracks, which was the murders along the N&W in its main period. And believe me, there wasn't a shortage. That's a 308-page book. And it's got some about the Hatfields and the McCoys, certainly the Matewan Massacre. I mean, yeah. They were almost standing on the railroad tracks. Not in the movie, that's not exactly, they were in the movie, that's not exactly in real life. They were beside the tracks. But anyway, it's a story from one of the cities along the N&W. So, but she wanted to do the Wayne County part. So we literally divided that book in half. She did all the Wayne County. I did all the Mingo County. We put them together, and they actually look like 2 books when you open the size. It says Wayne County Murders by K. Stamper Dickinson, Mingo County Murders by Jack Dickinson. So it's varied depending on what our interest has been on that subject, I guess.
Huh. I would think that would be difficult to do, but apparently you all have figured it out. That's great.
We have.
How do people get those books, those nonfiction
Okay,
books?
I'm glad you asked. I have a sign.
Ah, okay.
Available on Amazon, or if they would like to order them from us, we will autograph them for them.
Okay,
So I
you need
wanted
to
to, if I just said all this, I figured people may not get it. So
raise your sign up. Okay, keep going.
I can't see on that little thing there.
Okay, there you go. Jack Dickinson, 6221 Highland Drive, Huntington, 25705.
Right.
Got it.
Great.
So each of those are $12. That's perfect.
There you go.
All the nonfictions are available on Amazon as well.
Not two are sold out. The Last Train to Dunmo is sold out. We're not doing a reprint. The other is the Lumbering and Timbering book, which sold much better than we thought. It's sold out. The others are on Amazon. Yes, the nonfiction.
Super. Do you have favorite authors that you turn to over and over again, fiction or nonfiction?
Well, fiction. My father, when he was alive, he loved reading Nick Carter books.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yes, they are typical adventure fiction where the guy has lots of sex and drinks a lot of booze, but he's a great fighter. And that got me started. So I've read fiction adventure for 60 years, or maybe even more. And but lately, Clive Cussler is a very prolific adventure author. I don't know if you're familiar with any of his work. And I like his style and how he does some of the things in his book. You'll notice in Reluctant Detective, there are a few illustrations at the beginning of chapters, either a map or one scene. And I like Clive Cussler. I copied him on that, and I like what it lends to the book. And the first one I did, I had several of my friends, and of course I shined the bright light in their face and said, I'm not looking for compliments. I'm looking for suggestions and how I can do things better. And they all agreed they liked that style of designing and formatting the book. So Cussler's my one for fiction, I guess I would say, because I like how he develops characters and how he throws in a map or an illustration every now and then.
Mm-hmm. What about nonfiction?
Well, that varies. On the Civil War books, some of my favorite authors are Shelby Foote. My wife and I got to meet Shelby Foote. He came to Shawnee State, believe it or not. He didn't come any closer to West Virginia, but he came to Shawnee State, and we drove up there and got to listen to him. I really liked his books on the Civil War. Douglas Southall Freeman, he wrote a set on called Lee's Lieutenants. It's 3 volumes, and it's basically the history of the Confederate Army and the generals. And it's the way it's written. It's just, normally that stuff would be so dry you would only use it as a sleeping pill, and his isn't. And so those are my 2 big Civil War authors that I really think will stand forever as long as people are reading on the Civil War.
Right. That's interesting. Let's see, there was one other question I was going to ask you, and I lost track of what it was.
I tend to do that to people.
I said you grew up in Mingo County, but I know
Right.
it was Crum. Are you about the same vintage as Lee Maynard?
Yes, close to it. And if you're thinking about the book Crum,
Oh, yeah.
I was one of the first readers, and I didn't like what he did, but my wife and I both recognized people that were in it, that the name had been changed.
Yeah.
I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's good. Well, of course, it got banned for a while, but
but that just increases sales. You know that, Carter.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I think they also banned him in Crum as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do you most enjoy about writing?
Well, it certainly isn't the money I'm making on the books. It's the personal satisfaction of going, I wrote this and I'm proud of it, and that kind of thing, because I am proud of it. Now, 3 people edited that. We're fortunate. One of our grandsons has 2 degrees from Ohio State, and he loves editing this. He edited both of these for me. His name's with mine on the first one, because he actually contributed to some of the work on it. So it's great working with your family,
Yeah.
even though it takes convincing to tell him, I'm not looking for compliments. Don't you dare come back and say it was just fine. That's not what I'm after. I'm after suggestions to help. So, but the personal satisfaction of writing the story, develop the whole story in your head, and it comes out okay, and you're happy with what you produced. How about you? I imagine you're there.
Yeah, same thing. I just I enjoy being able to get it out there and hold a book and envision in the beginning that I'm going to have a book in my hand, and then
Right.
be happy
Exactly.
when it's done. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom today. We really appreciate it, and I know readers will look forward to reading both of your novels, if not all the nonfiction books you've written.
I hope so.
So
Well, thank you for having me.
Henry Ward, Reluctant Detective. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate it so much. We hope to return to live interviews sometime in the future, but in the meantime, this will do it for today. Please stay tuned to Armstrong for the news and views that will help you through your day. And stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.